The FIDH and the CENID, its member organization in Nicaragua, are publishing a report on the impact on human rights of a concession that was granted to a Chinese investor through several of his companies in June 2013. The objective of this concession is the construction and management of a canal going from the Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean Sea, and other mega projects including a pipeline, a deep water port, and several free trade zones. I here would like to underline three of the key findings of the report. The first one is related to the legal regime of the concession, both based on legislation that was voted to set the concession and the contractual agreement to which we could access to. And we consider that this legal regime contravenes several human rights standards. I would give two examples. The first one is the rules on the expropriation. Indeed, the legislation 140 that was voted to set the concession provides that the guarantees for victims of expropriation that are included in the Nicaraguan legislation from 1976 are not applicable, and in particular that the victims of expropriation will have no judicial or even administrative remedy against the decision of expropriation. It also provides for a very small indemnity for the victims of the expropriation, and thus we consider that this amount will not enable those victims to buy another land and to resettle, therefore having an impact in their right to property, to adequate housing, but also to alimentation. Most of the people living in the region are peasants living from their land. And this is contrary also to human rights standards. Between 30 to 120,000 people could be expropriated in the context of the construction of the canal. And I would say only in the context of the construction, because it was not possible for us to evaluate how many people would be expropriated in the context of the other projects, as there is very little information as to the territories that will be involved in those other mega projects. Another example is the right to water that will in particular affect those people living around the Lake Cocibolca or depending on him. The Lake Cocibolca is a lake of 80,000 kilometers square. It is the Central America primary freshwater reserve, and it will be crossed by the canal, causing irreparable environmental damages to the lake. What is also important to underline is that even the Nicaraguan legislation, in order to protect its hydric resources, prohibit concessions for hydric resources exceeding 30 years, and here we have a concession of 116 years. The second finding that I would like to underline is the fact that looking at the contractual agreements and at the legislation, there is a very clear unbalanced situation and a fragile situation for the state of Nicaragua. In fact, on the one side, the investor has exclusive rights on territory and water for 116 years with a lot of advantages. And on the other hand, the state will receive a derisory compensation for those rights, and there is no provision any obligation with respect to employment creation, environmental risk management or mitigation. What is also very concerning is that the state of Nicaragua will have to compensate any damage caused if a project is not carried out or is postponed, and this even in cases of political force majeure. Maybe the further key finding that I would like to address here relates to the situation, the events that happened in the last 3 years since the concession was granted. In that sense, we did a field investigation and interviewed more than 130 peasants of members of indigenous and Afro communities living in the area where the canal will be built. And on the one hand, we realized the lack of information, the lack of transparency on the whole project, but also the fact that neither the local authorities or the indigenous and Afro communities were properly consulted on this very important project. But even more concerning is the fact that the state of Nicaragua has been intimidating the communities that are mobilizing against the construction of the canal. This has been done through the militarization of the area, through criminalization, through repression of demonstration. Obviously, those are very serious violations of the right to freedom of expression and the right to demonstrate. In conclusion, FIDH and the CENID, we consider that this concession could lead to a mega land and water grabbing, and also that this cannot be equated to a sustainable development project. And the lack of experience from the companies involved in the concession, the lack of public tendering in the context of the decision to identify the investor, and the unbalance of the contractual relationship I was referring to before point out to the possible existence of a corruption scheme. All those conclusions lead us to urge the government of Nicaragua to abandon this project.